Hello everyone, and welcome to another episode of the Daily Gwei Refuel, where I recap the latest news in the Ethereum ecosystem. I'm your host, Anthony Sassano, and today's the 17th of August, 2021. Alright everyone, let's get into it. So, I wrote about this in my newsletter today, but this funny meme coming from kiwi.eth here, he's pretty active within the Ethereum ecosystem, works at Prior Labs as an engineer, and works on a bunch of other different things, as you can see in his bio there. But he put out this really funny meme where it's basically, for those listening, it's a picture of a room with just like a PC in like the corner and a picture of like an NFT on, I guess like on the wall as a painting. And then the whole rest of the room is like empty. There's no furniture, there's no chairs or anything else like that. And it's funny because I wrote about this in the newsletter, but I think this perfectly encapsulates what I guess like the crypto ecosystem is and what kind of like the type of people in it and kind of, I guess, what the culture is. Because at the end of the day, and I titled the newsletter Metaverse Millionaires. At the end of the day, there's been a lot of people over, I guess, like the last 12 years, especially younger people who have basically bought BTC or ETH early on, or on any number of other things over time, like DeFi and all that sorts of stuff. They've bought that early on, and then they've made a lot of money on it and become these kind of like metaverse millionaires, as I like to call them, where they're not really too concerned about the physical world, owning things in the physical world or kind of like showing off their wealth in the physical world, because everything's pretty much digital when it comes to crypto, right? So instead of, I guess, like flexing their wealth or kind of like buying physical status symbols, they're buying digital ones. There's the CryptoPunks of the world. Depending on kind of like the level of wealth you have is what CryptoPunk you can afford, whether you have like a zombie or an ape or an alien even, or just like a floor punk or whatever, things like that. A CryptoPunk or an NFT is not the only kind of like way to kind of like show that wealth. You can be like a whale, in one of the protocols where you own a lot of the token and you can kind of like swing votes and stuff like that. There's a lot of different ways you can kind of like flex, but it's not just the flexing aspect to it. It's the fact that young people want to feel like they own a piece of something, right? At the end of the day, they want to feel like they own, a piece of like a world. And at the end of the day, the old world is just unattainable for a lot of these people, and it's uninteresting too. Like, property, especially for a lot of younger people, is out of their reach, right? It's just ridiculous how much you have to kind of like spend on kind of maybe property closer to the city and things like that, especially. But because if you're into crypto and you're like part of the ecosystem you work with in crypto, it's basically all online. So your physical location is really not of concern. So you'll typically see a lot of people within crypto move around a lot. They'll just live out of a laptop. I mean, Vitalik himself lives out of a laptop, or they may have a property, somewhere in a rural area or on a farm or whatever, or something like that, or out in like the bush, as we like to call it in Australia, rather than anywhere kind of close to the city, because they don't need to be there, right? But there are definitely a lot of crypto nomads and stuff like that. So because they don't have much of a physical presence, but they kind of like make up for that by having a big digital presence. And that's what I mean by like metaverse millionaires, and that's what this picture kind of like shows, is that you can have all of this wealth, right? Millions and millions of dollars or whatever, but it's all represented within the digital space rather than the physical space. And of course, you can blend the two. You can display your NFTs physically in the real world, as I do behind me, or you can have like a bunch of other stuff like figurines and stuff around you or whatever. But at the end of the day, like, I think majority of the people aren't like that. They really just, I guess like travel light, live lightly, and then definitely it's trending more towards kind of like things being digital, because of the fact that if you want to travel around, if you want to be a nomad, if you want to kind of like be able to kind of work out of anywhere sort of thing, then you really do need to have just a digital presence, and the physical presence just becomes cumbersome for you and just becomes something that is a liability at the end of the day. For example, for me to move my digital life around is like super, super easy, right? I just have to have my hardware wallets on me or whatever, or my phone, my laptop, whatever. But for me to move my physical kind of like location is extremely hard. I have to move all the stuff that I have unless I want to leave it in storage. But I still have to have somewhere physically to put it, like all my figurines and all my books and everything and all that sort of stuff. Whereas, digital is just much easier to move. And I think it's funny because, like, when you think about, like, the generational shift there as well, where typically, as I mentioned, like, property is out of reach for a lot of young people, but it's not just property, it's a lot of other things. Most of the wealth, as the old world wealth, is part of like the older generation, right? They grew up with it, they invested in it early on, they got exposure to it, and as it kind of went through, they are now like kind of like the gatekeepers of these massive institutions and these massive kind of like uh, companies and things like that where they own a lot of the wealth there. Whereas within the new world, they're actually the late adopters, right? The early adopters are the young people. And, if we can't own the old world, well, we'll own the new world. It's as simple as that. So there is definitely that wealth transfer effect going on as well, where by the time, the kind of like the older generations, or at least these institutions, start buying into these assets, they're already worth hundreds of billions of dollars. Like institutions didn't even look at BTC or ETH until they were worth hundreds of billions of dollars. I think definitely for Bitcoin, it was about that. They weren't even purchasing it. I don't even think Michael Saylor purchased his first Bitcoin until it was worth, I think it was $200 billion, something like that, something crazy. So if you kind of look at that, and kind of like see how the arc of adoption happens, if you're young, you're I guess like got more freedom, maybe you don't have kids and things like that, and you have like more of a risk appetite too, because of the fact that it's just you, or maybe you have a partner or whatever. You don't have like massive mortgages or bills or whatever. You put your money into crypto and you take a bigger risk, but the reward is a massive payoff. And I think a lot of young people have done that over the years. So yeah, I just thought that this meme that Kiwi put out there just perfectly encapsulated that generational shift that we're seeing. And on top of that, another aspect that I don't think is talked about enough is the fact that because this is all digital, you don't have to take your real life persona or your real life identity to the digital world. You can be whoever you want to be. Obviously, it's a bit too late for me to do that. I mean, I could make an alt account on Twitter and basically shitpost as an anon, as they're called. But at this point in time, like who I am and my reputation and everything is tied directly to my real life identity, and I don't mind that. That's kind of like how I played it. But there are a ton of anonymous and pseudonymous accounts on Twitter, like all the animal accounts, all those sorts of things like that we all know and love, and they're unknown to most people, and they're on the cover of Fortune magazine, as I showed the other day. People Pleaser kind of made some art and put them on the cover of Fortune magazine, which also encapsulated that kind of like shift, or from kind of like old money to new money, and kind of like how the shift is happening on both a generational, but like I guess like an identity level as well, which I thought was really interesting. So yeah, just a bit of color of how I'm thinking about these sorts of things. And I'm sure there's a lot of you watching that maybe you don't have a big social presence, or maybe you do and you're one of the anons or whatever. But generally, I think we're just going to see that trend continue, where more and more people are going to just shed their old world identity, and their identity might be tied to one of their NFTs. Like I know there's plenty of accounts on Twitter that have a decent following that are tied to their crypto punks. Like no one knows who they are, but their punk is their avatar, and that's kind of like their identity. And obviously there's people that are known that change their profile pictures to punks, but it's definitely a different thing there. So very interesting shift happening, in the world right now that I think a lot of people just don't realize is happening. And by the time they do, it will have taken over society. It's kind of like what happened with the internet. By the time most people clued into what was happening, it had already kind of been embedded into everything that people were doing, and kind of like taken over a lot. And people were like, "Oh my god, what's this internet thing now?" Then I have to learn it. And you typically have that general like adoption cycle curve, which I think a lot of you will have seen already. Like you can Google that adoption cycle kind of like curve, and you can kind of like see it goes to the late majority. And by the time the late majority's in, I mean pretty much like all of the growth is already kind of like happened, right? By the time the late majority comes, it's the tendency for that thing or that technology to go like 100x or 1000x growth is very, very low. And you saw this play out with like the smartphone boom, for example. I think this is the perfect example, because I actually saw this play out in my own family, and when I was working at a telecommunications company. Essentially, you have all the early adopters, right? And they all get into technology and use smartphones and build all the apps and everything like that. And then 10 years later, I started seeing maybe the older generations who hadn't grown up with technology start adopting smartphones, and start 10 years later, being from like 2007, 2017, and start getting into it. But by the time they had adopted it, smartphones were already absolutely massive and it was everywhere. We were on like iPhone 7 or 8 at that point, or something like that. So you don't want to be in that cohort. You want to be as early as possible, and I think that's where all of us are today within crypto. And on that note as well, I mean, I put out another tweet here where I basically said, I believe crypto is the most disruptive force since the internet, and probably even more disruptive. I actually think it's more disruptive because the internet was a social and technological revolution, but crypto is social, technological, and monetary. And I think a monetary revolution is kind of like, I guess probably the base of it. Like that is where everything is kind of built on, and then you have the technology aspect and the social aspect and the culture. I mean, there's so many different things that crypto kind of touches here that I actually think it's much more disruptive than the internet. But on that note, mass adoption hasn't even come close to happening yet, and it won't happen until crypto is embedded into everyone's lives in a seamless and ubiquitous way. So in the end, just long adoption and long everything, really. I mean, at the end of the day, if you look at kind of how the markets play out as well, like if you had bought like pretty much any of the things within crypto, even if you know, maybe they even were a scam or whatever, the market is just in such a Cambrian explosion of both innovation and growth that these kind of things do just kind of like tend to go up altogether, like a rising tide lifts all boats sorts of thing. That's not to say that a lot of this stuff is something that you should buy or you should invest in for the long term, or you should even invest in at all. But generally, like longing everything, I mean, in this kind of like phase that we're in is not a bad idea. But like obviously for me, I long ETH and, you know, within the Ethereum ecosystem, whatever I find valuable there. But generally, I guess like longing isn't just got to do with investing either. If you want to long this ecosystem from like a non-monetary standpoint, you invest yourself into it, right? You invest your own time into it, invest your I guess like skills and knowledge and all that sort of stuff. Because at the end of the day, you can essentially kind of like jump into this ecosystem, get a job, I think, relatively easily. I don't think it's actually too hard. You just have to have the kind of like motivation, consistency, you know, a little bit of like a prior knowledge. But like you can learn a lot of it on the job, and definitely you want to be passionate about it too, and kind of like change your life like that, which I think is a very kind of like, I guess, unique thing with crypto, in that you can be anywhere in the world and work for any other company. Like pretty much every company or DAO is fine working with remote people, fine working asynchronously, like in different time zones and things like that. There's really no issue there. So from that perspective, I think that mass adoption hasn't even started yet on kind of like every kind of like angle. I know that we're seeing crazy numbers flying around, but it's just nothing, because I was kind of like talking in the Discord channel today about this, where I basically said, I think, you know, just as a rough estimation, if you were to actually look at how embedded DeFi is with the rest of the financial ecosystem, it's like 0.1% probably of like the dominance of the rest of the financial ecosystem, because crypto is not used for everyday payments at all. And payments is the backbone of the entire world's economy, right? Like payment is the most basic thing you do. Crypto is not embedded into that at all. None of the major banks are embedded into crypto. Yes, they may have accounts for people, but that's holding fiat. They're not like tapping into DeFi protocols or anything like that, or kind of like, I think, acting as front ends. I mean, I could go on about the list here, but there's just basically none of that. And if we've achieved what, you know, the numbers that we have and the growth that we have, and, you know, running into all these scaling issues with just 0.1% of the kind of like market share of finance, when I believe DeFi is going to be 100% of that in maybe, you know, maybe it takes a little while, 10, 20 years to be 100%, but I do believe it's going to be a large portion of it, and eventually TradFi is just going to be completely phased out. Well, then it's very easy to say that we're just like stupidly early, and mass adoption isn't even close to happening yet. It technically can't happen too, because of the fact that we still have a lot of growing pains, not just on the scale side of things, but also on the UX and making it seamless for people to kind of like interact with this sort of stuff. At the end of the day, you know, if you want this to be an actual payments network, you would need someone like Visa to basically change over their entire payments network to something like a layer 2 on Ethereum. Just as an example there, because that's the quickest way to bootstrap this whole thing. And of course, you know, that would be centralized, but that would be kind of like a bridge, and then obviously over time we would want to kind of like get that payments infrastructure done in a decentralized way. But there's definitely like kind of like hybrid approaches here to getting adoption. And at the end of the day, most people, you know, it's funny because most people on the surface may not care about decentralization until they need it. So I think that the kind of like decentralized world that we all envision and we all want to happen will just take longer to play out. But we're going to have this kind of like hybrid phase where there's going to be tons and tons of centralized companies, institutions, you know, entities, whatever you want to call them, tapping into our kind of like DeFi rails or decentralized rails on Ethereum, on layer 2s, on side chains, you know, anywhere. And it's funny because like sometimes I get called like an Ethereum maximalist and all this sort of stuff because I just focus on Ethereum. But I really do believe that the total addressable market for smart contracts and for this technology is so, you know, immense. Like it's insanely big, right? It doesn't just cover finance; it covers so many other areas that while I believe Ethereum is going to retain most of the market share, is going to be like the biggest player, it's going to have like obviously the most decentralization and security, these kind of like other chains that feed into it, through bridging or whatever, that's not going to be bearish if they get adoption for Ethereum, because it's too big. Like the ecosystem is just too big. It's growing too rapidly. It's still got another just rough numbers. I would say like the ecosystem in general still has many, many thousands of times more kind of like growth left in it. That's not to say that ETH's going to go 1000x, right? Like from here or whatever. Like that would put it at a really high value. I think it's $3 million or something like that. Maybe one day, but that's not to say that that's going to happen anytime soon or whatever. But that's to say that the adoption in terms of like how many people we're servicing is going to explode. Because if you think about it, even if there's only 1 million people that are actually using this technology, I'm not talking about people who bought crypto on an exchange, because there's more than 1 million people who did that. I'm talking about 1 million unique people who have actually used DeFi and used it actively, like say a monthly active user. Do we have 1 million today? Let's just say we do. Well, 1000x from there is 1 billion, which covers most of the, a big chunk of the developed world, right? But a lot of this stuff is being built for the developing world too. So, and the human population is almost 8 billion. You see where I'm going with this, right? And it's not just like a human adoption standpoint either. It's kind of like a capital adoption standpoint, liquidity as well, and all that sorts of stuff there. So yeah, just I guess strap in, because like we haven't seen anything yet. We really haven't. And people just, I think, are really underestimating how crazy this ecosystem is going to get over the coming years. And you really are on the ground floor still, I believe. And you really do have an opportunity to still kind of like, ride this wave up in a big way. As long as like my number one rule in this ecosystem is, as long as you don't blow yourself up, whether that be by leverage trading or trading away your stack, or losing your stack to a hack, or basically losing your kind of like access to your hardware wallet or your seed phrase or whatever, as long as you just don't blow yourself up, you are going to do absolutely fine in this ecosystem. So yeah, just that's my only real kind of like overarching advice when it comes to kind of, I guess, like the monetary side of things in crypto, is that I've seen many people blow themselves up and it just wasn't worth it for the risk they were taking, because maybe they increased their ETH stack by like 20% if it paid off, but the kind of like I guess drawback is 100% loss or something like that, or like 50% loss. So you always have to kind of weigh up those pros and cons and make sure that you're not getting yourself to a position where you're going to blow yourself up. But yeah. On that note, I'm going to move on to the next thing here. So I saw this post today from a Twitter account called Zero Knowledge Validator, and they've introduced this ZK Open Legal Working Group, which is 11 projects working in collaboration to create legal clarity around the use of zero knowledge proofs to unleash their full potential for privacy and scaling applications. Now, there's a bunch of kind of like familiar names here: Hermes, Diversify, Aztec, Gnosis, Figment, and they seem to be forming this kind of like legal group to make sure that zero knowledge technology is not regulated to heavily, and I guess kind of like regulated to a point where it becomes unfeasible. And I think we need more of these kind of working groups, given the regulatory kind of landscape that we're seeing play out right now, especially within the DeFi landscape, and obviously with the infrastructure bill and all that sorts of stuff. It really is kind of like something that we need more focus on, and we need more people working on. So I'm great to see the kind of this group form here. But if you want to learn more about this, I'll link the Medium post that they put out in their in the YouTube description. But yeah, I mean, I just think this is a really big positive for the ecosystem, and it came out of nowhere, but I'm glad to see it happening. So Dune Analytics tweeted out a picture today of OpenSea's growth, and they were quote tweeting Alex Atallah, I think that's how you say his last name here, who is the co-founder and CTO of OpenSea, where he said OpenSea has now passed Etsy in volume with $1 billion so far in August. NFTs are rapidly catching up to all of eBay. Obviously, this growth has been insane. I do think that this is like an apples to apples, is not an apples to apples comparison, because Etsy is like mostly pretty much, actually I would say like pretty much all of Etsy's goods are physical goods, right? Whereas OpenSea is all digital, and it's much easier to move digital goods. And obviously with crypto, everything's on steroids and everything. So I wouldn't say it's an apples to apples comparison, but it's still wild to see like the volumes that these kind of platforms are doing. And this is like just in August, right? I mean, going back to the tweet here from Dune Analytics, this chart, you can see that OpenSea's growth has just been absolutely insane. I mean, they have been the main beneficiary of the NFT boom. Now, there's speculation that OpenSea might do a token. But there's other speculation that OpenSea might be going public as well. And maybe that's why they're kind of tweeting this out, because Etsy is actually a public company. They have a market cap of $24 billion. So if OpenSea is doing more volume than Etsy, well, then logically, if OpenSea were to go public, instead of issuing a token, they should be worth $24 billion as well, which is a very, very nice payday for all of the investors or the early investors in OpenSea. I am really upset that I didn't get a chance to invest in OpenSea, of course, and I'm sure we all are. But I don't know. I hope they don't go the public route here. I hope they go kind of like the token route, because I believe that crypto projects should issue tokens. And even if you believe that OpenSea doesn't need to be decentralized and doesn't need a token or a DAO or whatever, I do believe tokens can still act like traditional kind of like equities or stocks or whatever you want to call them, and kind of give like holders, dividends or cash flow rights or whatever. And it can be still registered as a security or whatever you want to call it. That's fine, but it's just like issued as a token on Ethereum or something. I think that is more in the crypto spirit. And I think that with a token, you also have the option of a kind of like airdropping as well, right? Like you airdrop a token to all of the past users of OpenSea. Now, if they don't do a token and they go public, I actually think that's going to cause a little bit of heat, because there'll be a lot of early users who say, where's, my airdrop, basically? Like, where's my share of everything? And it goes against the crypto spirit of rewarding the creators and kind of like the contributors rather than rewarding a centralized company. But we'll have to see how that plays out. I still think it's interesting just to see like how much the OpenSea has grown in just like a few short months here. It's just been insane. But is this the NFT top? Like, is there going to be a mini bear market? Who knows? Like, at this point in crypto, I'm done calling tops on anything, because as I've said multiple times, I think we're in an adoption super cycle. So it's going to be very hard to call a top on anything right now. And that's why I said long adoption, long everything, because in an adoption super cycle, everything's just going up, because you have like so much innovation happening, so much experimentation. You have so much people coming in. They don't know what's going to win. So everyone's just betting on everything. It's going to be a crazy time. That's for sure. So Taylor Zhang, who kind of like put out this tweet today about Maskbook, or Mask Network, which I basically covered in yesterday's Daily Gwei newsletter about the Web3 features that they're bringing to Web2, such as basically, and I spoke about this on the Refuel, how you could, with the Mask Network kind of extension, you could embed like a decentralized exchange widget into your tweet, and then into Twitter, and then be able to trade assets directly from Twitter. But he basically quote tweeted the tweet that I was referencing in my newsletter from Chop here, saying that Mask Network already has everything that Chop listed for Discord, but on Twitter instead. And then Taylor went on to kind of explain how and why they've got that. And he mentions that I said in my newsletter that Maskbook has the trading widget for Uniswap, but that was over 10 months ago, and they've already upgraded to a multi-chain, multi-dex solution that integrates all these other kind of ones here. Then he goes on to say, other than the trading plugin, they've integrated DeFi, like Pool Together, and Augur, and DHedge, and stuff like that. And then non-DeFi applications, they've also integrated OpenSea and Rarible and Arweave, and there's so many integrations happening here. I didn't know how, that they had done all of this. I haven't used it in a little while. As I said on kind of like, I guess, the review yesterday, if you're a power user like me and you have like 6 monitors in front of you, this sort of stuff probably won't appeal to you as much. But I think this sort of stuff is definitely appealing for people who maybe live out of a laptop or are on the go and more kind of like mobile than I am. I mean, very hard for me to be mobile right now considering I'm in lockdown. But I think, it's definitely very appealing for that. And for those people who don't want to have like a million browser tabs everywhere. I mean, I think I have like 200 tabs open right now. It's not healthy. But yeah, I mean, I really liked the fact that Taylor put together this thread. You can go check this out and read the whole one. It'll be linked in the YouTube description. But it really shows that a lot of these things are already out there and already kind of like readily integrated. And we're just going to have to see the adoption here. And like, I didn't even know that they had come this far, which I think is just really, really cool to see. So Hasu on Twitter put out this interesting kind of tweet today where it's funny. He's like, it's always risky when you put something out about Bitcoin and Bitcoin's monetary policy. But essentially what Hasu said was that since people are once again telling me being Hasu, that BTC fees have only ever gone up over time, here is an update on the data. Security budget equals market cap divided by miner revenue. Doesn't matter if you denominate in dollars or BTC as long as you're consistent. And as you can see here, as the block subsidy has dropped over time, and the transaction fees has also dropped over time. So the transaction fees are not making up for the loss in kind of like the block subsidy budget, like the security budget that you get from the block subsidy. Because obviously every 4 years the block subsidy halves, and then obviously the security budget goes down because of that. So the transaction fees aren't making up for it, and you can see here as well that the security budget, just including fees annualized, and this shows a perfect example of it, has not really increased. I mean, it basically peaked in end of 2017, early 2018, the last bull market, and since then it's remained quite steady. And this is simply because there's not much to do on the Bitcoin network, right? You just send BTC to one another. And I said a long time ago, like years ago, I think I said this in 2018 to some people, that because of the fact that there's just like not much to do on Bitcoin, it makes zero sense to me that Bitcoin would have high on-chain fees at the end of the day, because the demand to transact on Bitcoin is just so low. Like the only thing you do on Bitcoin is you send Bitcoin to and from an exchange, like arbitrageurs do this, but they're commonly using kind of like either layer 2 solutions or solutions that are sitting on top that kind of, I guess, act as like a kind of like a side chain, but like something centralized where you can send BTC from one exchange to the other. Or, maybe they're using Lightning Network. I don't know. But generally, I think that over time, the kind of like revenue from transaction fees on the Bitcoin network is just going to keep trending down. And that's not going to make up for the block subsidy. So over the next kind of like, I guess, decade, in the next 2 Bitcoin halvenings, Bitcoin's actually security budget is actually going to fall so low that it's going to become very easy to attack the network because of the fact that, unless the price of ETH has kind of price of BTC has gone up a lot, it just becomes very, very hard to kind of like justify the fact, kind of like argue that Bitcoin's going to be secure. So this is obviously something that the Bitcoin maximalists don't want to discuss. It's sacrilege to discuss, because the only way to fix this, I guess there's multiple ways to fix this, but the easiest way to fix this is to essentially get rid of the 21 million limit and keep issuing Bitcoin in perpetuity, kind of like what Ethereum is doing by issuing ETH in perpetuity, but we also have the fee burn to kind of make ETH deflationary, which I'm going to talk about in a sec, actually. Or you go to proof of stake, which is takes much less capital, is much less capital intensive to secure, and you get more bang for your buck out of proof of stake. Now, those two things are not something that I foresee Bitcoin integrating anytime soon, if ever. They hate proof of stake, at least the Bitcoin maximalists do, and they love the 21 million supply limit, and they love that they think it can't change. Of course it can change, but they don't want it to change. So this is like a rock and a hard place, I think, for Bitcoin, and it's going to be a very interesting decade for it. But I just wanted to kind of like point this out here, because Hasu, I think, is one of the only really objective people in this ecosystem. He definitely has kind of like some subjective opinions, but he tends to stay pretty objective. Like he's an Ethereum, he's a Bitcoiner. He points out the faults in both commonly. So I really do take his opinion seriously whenever he brings up something. But yeah, I mean, this is something that I've been talking about for quite a while as well. And I'm glad that there's more attention being put on this. I'm not just trying to FUD Bitcoin or whatever, but this is one of my long-term concerns with it for sure. And I don't think it's concern trolling to say that its security budget is going down over time, because you can literally see it in the data. So speaking of that deflationary ETH that I was talking about, or ETH's monetary policy, there's a few new features on ultrasound.money, which has become, as I've said, my favorite website for watching ETH burn here. But essentially, they now have a macro burn indicator in ETH per year. So they're basically annualized ETH being burned a year, which is currently at about 1.7 million. They have the second feature here, macro supply growth in percent per year. So what's the net supply growth here? So it's 3.1% extra, like, taking away the amount of ETH that's going to be burned per year. Then what's the issuance? Well, the net issuance is 5.3 million new ETH per year, and then you can actually toggle to simulate the merge. So if you toggle this right now, in a proof of stake world, we would be deflationary. There would be a negative 1.1% of ETH issued per year, and that would mean there's only 0.4 million 400,000 new ETH issued per year, but $1.7 million is being burned. This is why the merge is so bullish, right? This is why everyone's like saying, I'm saying especially that the merge is like much more bullish than 1559, is because of the fact that we are deflationary today at these kind of like gas price, and by a lot. Like that's a lot, right? And then you can kind of like obviously toggle it back here and see that with proof of work, we're paying a lot for security, which I just, it's too much. And if I had it my way, I would have loved to see another block reduction within Ethereum where we actually halve the block reward from 2 ETH per block to 1 ETH per block, that would have probably put us still at, I guess you could say 1.55% per year, but I guess like it would have made up for the fact that we've just been overpaying miners. But anyway, good to see these new features integrated on ultrasound.money here. And then the last thing to talk about is this tweet from Stani, who said, well-designed Web3 protocols does not solve every single thing, instead leaves room for the community to invent and build the rest of the features. This is... So when you kind of look at this and relate it back to the two newsletter pieces I've done on Friday and Monday around decentralized social media and Web3 stuff and all that sorts of stuff, this is exactly what I was talking about, where... And it doesn't just apply to that. It also applies to things like DeFi. I still count DeFi under like the Web3 umbrella, but essentially you do like this kind of, you deploy these smart contracts to the chain. Uniswap is the perfect example here. And then you basically give tools to developers to build on top of it. And they can build on top of it without fear of getting shut down because it's decentralized. If some of you have followed the Web 2 world, there used to be a lot of open APIs early on in Facebook's life, in Twitter's life, and whatever, and people could build whatever they wanted on there. But then Facebook said, well, we're leaking way too much value here by letting developers build whatever they want on here, and let's just shut this off. And they kicked a lot of developers and their apps off the platform by doing so. A lot of you may remember a lot of the early Facebook games. I remember things like Farmville. They were built on there, but there was massive platform risk. And what ended up happening was that Facebook just basically killed it off. They're like, no more open kind of like building here. They still have an API and stuff like that, but it's incredibly restricted, and they wanted to keep everything in-house. Whereas crypto is the exact opposite of that, where Uniswap is deployed to an open protocol. It's completely decentralized, and anyone can build on it. And there's nothing that Uniswap can do to stop people from building on it and for deploying whatever they want to it. Like, you can deploy any kind of token you want or whatever. You can build whatever interface you want on it. And that is the kind of like Web3, crypto, Ethereum, DeFi kind of ethos. And that's kind of like, I think what's going to happen with decentralized social media as well, is that if it does kind of become a thing, the contracts, or at least the underlying, foundations of it need to be open. And then there can't be like an admin key or a central point of failure that can essentially kick people off the platform and kick people off from building on them, or for developers from building on it. So yeah, interesting thing to think about from Stani here. But I think that is it for today. So thank you everyone for listening and watching. Be sure to subscribe to the channel if you haven't yet. Give that video a thumbs up, subscribe to the newsletter, join the Discord channel, and I'll catch you all tomorrow. Thanks everyone.